Hey everyone. So Johnny Chainsaw and I made our first podcast, and we found this app called Anchor. It was really easy. Once we found it, it really brought things together. So you can record and edit your podcast right from your phone or from your computer. You can hear it on Spotify, Apple, a bunch of other places. It really is kind of everything that you need in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hey, Galaxy. This is the podcast from Johnny Chainsaw and AZPotato. This is AZPotato. And we have a special guest that we called out kind of in our player spotlight in the last episode, and we refer to him as Logres most commonly, but I think his name is actually pronounced differently. So Logres, why don't you explain to me how your name should be pronounced and where it comes from?
Pleasure to be here, Potato. I picked my name, which is actually pronounced low graze, like low down grazing like a cow, because it's based on an old Welsh term for the area around which King Arthur and his knights are believed to have existed. And this version of the term specifically refers to the code of chivalry. What we think of today as, give mercy where it's due, and generosity and things like that. So that's where I got it.
Well, yeah, and both Johnny Chainsaw and I had some pretty good stuff to say about you, and really specifically about your consistency and your kind of rules of chivalry and the way you play in the game. How do you respond to that?
It's pretty humbling. I appreciate the fact that people seem to have taken some of my actions to heart, and that I really don't want people to have a miserable time playing. And I do want to ensure that, for example, having a private message conversation with somebody can be completely separate from the role play or the quasi role play that we do in Galaxy Chat, for example.
Yeah, but it's a great point. So here's a question for you, right? Are you a Star Trek like purist kind of fan? You watch every show, you watch every movie, and you downloaded this game because it had the name Star Trek in front of it, or was it something else that caused you to download the game?
Well, first and foremost, it had the magic word in it, and that was fleet. Anytime I see a game that has, whether it be wet navy or space navy, ship-to-ship combat, I'm interested. But I'm actually a sci-fi nerd extraordinaire. Maybe I really dig Star Trek, Star Wars, Dune, Babylon 5, The Expanse, Battlestar Galactica, you name it. I really, really love sci-fi. Some of my favorite movies, like Aliens, and there's that. It's just one of those things that I've always really enjoyed as a vehicle to tell stories, and I appreciate the fact that as it's a future concept, the story and the role play around it can actually be focused on betterment, and that usually is the case. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. So before we get into some of the topics that we kind of have on the agenda, you and I have both been playing the game since pretty close to the beginning of it, and we've had some pretty good, like some really fun, and for me personally, really frustrating battles because you just always ate my ships, and I think you were probably. No, I know for certain. You were like one of the group that like raided my base and drained me for the very first time that I got raided, and it was a big just kick in the gut for me, right? what was going on there?
Well, that's a loaded question to some extent. I first off, let's be totally open here. I've been rated a couple of times. I generally don't gripe about it, mainly because I feel like if I gripe about it, I'm advertising for whoever managed to slip one by me. There have been a couple of times that I've let people rate me, especially when they're lower level guys. Recently, that honestly, I can afford to lose the resources when I've been banking tokens, and it does help lower level guys. But cases where I raid people, yeah, sometimes I feel bad. It's yeah, I know it's part of the game, but I really don't want people run out of the game because they got raided. So there have been cases in the past where I've stopped raiding people, where I don't tell anybody in my alliance that I've cracked a base and raided it, so that I can stop after I've gotten a certain amount out without completely draining the target. And there've been cases where I've just been really thankful that whoever I was draining with the alliance, and I've been with Ghost since the beginning. I hope and pray that sometimes they come online and bubble so that we don't drain them all the way, so they aren't deflated and want to quit the game.
Yeah, so I remember personally when I was getting raided, and I think I was with Shadow at the time. I know I was, and I had just joined them, and suddenly all these guys showed up to help defend my base against the Logres odds, right? Which you had ships that were just unbeatable at the time, but they still showed up. So let's talk about what it means to be part of an alliance that backs up their team members a little bit. What do you think about that?
Actually, it's amazing to me both how frequently and how quickly so many players in a given alliance can do it, but that pales in comparison to the lack of alliance cooperation that the game has traditionally had, to see official allies from other alliances show up to defend. There was a period where Ghost and JLP were, we were tight, and I can't tell you how many times the JLP guys were getting raided or we were getting raided, and man, it was all we could do to stop climbing over each other to get over there and defend one another. So, and those were good times too, like a lot of other times. I love the fact that you can defend your comrades in this game in that format. I wish there was a better solution to station shields and things. I feel like that is kind of game breaking in some ways. I mean, I went several months without using a shield at all because I was one of only a handful of people in the 40 plus range warp areas. So I have like 5 years worth of shields. So that's kind of ridiculous. Why would I?
So speaking about kind of this JLP, and you've been a long, maybe always, member of Ghost, or Crazy Ghost, or the names have changed, and there's been some weird dynamics that have happened there. But somehow you have a relationship in game with JohnyChainsaw, and not that you support his play style, but you guys have this other conversation on top of what you do, kind of alliance to alliance together. How does that work?
A couple of reasons. I kind of alluded to it earlier in that I really don't want there to be a mixture between in-game role-play level hatred, kind of despising one another because you're Klingon and and I'm Kirk or anything like that. But I would rather see it be propagandizing or talking smack or however you want to phrase it in Galaxy chat, or in public forums to play the role and have fun with it. But if people are really upset or people are struggling, or we've seen a lot of memorials in game for people who've lost loved ones, and we all remember Screw, and losing him was a hell of a blow to Cotton Eye Joe and I. And guys like Johnny Chainsaw they stepped up, man. They said, hey, we've got these real life situations going on. We don't want people to suffer in real life, and we certainly don't want their concern over how their investment in a game, whether it just be time or it be time and money or mostly money or what have you, they didn't want to see that become an additional burden. And it says a lot to their character. It speaks very highly of both him and a lot of the JLP crew, that when those times happened, they stepped up and said, no, we're gonna get on board with you guys. And that resounded very strongly with me and made it very easy for me to segregate the relationship I have in private messages and person-to-person conversation with a lot of people in game, and Johnny Chainsaw is one of them.
Yeah, I agree, and kind of the same thing happened with me, and many others, and we've talked and PM'd in game many times over the last 18 months, and you've hit me a lot, right? And there was a point where, man, if Logres flew into the system, the best option for me was bring all ships home and shield up, because it was going to be a horrible experience about to happen. I mean, but at the same time, we've had some great conversations over the last year and a half. So, what are your thoughts on that? And I know you have a long history of raiding, draining, hitting my miners.
I do limit my raids and drains if I can, but I do play the game the way it was meant to be played in a lot of ways, and I don't want people to be offended by it, but I do try to add a little bit of judicious control there and not go overboard. For people to tell me that they're a little afraid of me flying into the system, and you're not the first to say something or like that or close to it. I don't think of myself as the violent, crazy guy or anything like that, but on the same token, if I've established a reputation that, maybe a little bit ruthless, hopefully a lot fair, that's good. But if I've established a terrorizing, oh my goodness, Logres showed up, everybody run and hide, well, that does kind of backfire on you sometimes. And in the early days, when we didn't have access to a lot of mining nodes and stuff, people who were over cargo really, they contributed very heavily to my refining and growth capacity. So I can't really say that I regret too many of those on mine over cargo hits. That's for sure.
And as you know, like I was probably the first to admit, like, hey, you hit me fair and square, because I always push the limits of kind of going over cargo on my miners and keep them there, as long as I could, and you hit me, and I think you and I had a pretty good. As much as I didn't like getting hit, I could respect it, because you never hit me unfairly.
Yeah. And I really loathe the idea of doing that in cases, because it like I said, and I've talked about this as well before, but I just don't like the idea that people who can't sit here and watch the game like a hawk don't get an opportunity to play because someone is too ruthless or too aggressive. I can appreciate those play styles, and I really do. I mean, people hate saying it, but the game needs Johnny Chainsaws running around, effectively murdering everyone from time to time. That it needs that sort of thing, because it helps turn over stuff that's happening in game. People aren't really getting hurt because of it. We're not talking about taking away people's paychecks or giving them a case of COVID-19. We're talking about digital pixels, on a screen, and there's a big difference there, and it helped keep the game a little fresh in one more piece of the puzzle way. So it's good.
Yeah. So let's talk about kind of this topic that's on the front of everyone's mind, and that is the rumor of, right, and maybe a confirmed rumor of server mergers. What's that going to do to an alliance? One, to the server, and two, to an alliance that has the longevity of Ghost that you've been part of since the very beginning. What's going to change? What are your thoughts on server mergers?
I'll bring up maybe a couple of things that are my biggest concerns with server mergers, and that's not necessarily a negative concern. My biggest negative worry is that there's going to be a server merge, and we gain a lot more players that are either very high in our level spectrum or very low in our level spectrum, because I think that'll defeat the purpose of the server mergers, which should be to mix and mingle more within the range of each server. Say, for example, 90% of our players are over level 30. We don't want the server merge to bring in another equal number of level 20 or below players. Why? Because, well, then none of us can interact really. I mean, we can interact in conversation, but we can't fight each other ship to ship. We can't raid each other's bases. We can't coordinate tactics or strategy or anything like that. Those terms are a little limited in Star Trek Fleet Command, but they still exist, and that's a significant portion. If they do manage to put everybody more or less within the same range, plus or minus a couple of levels, that, however, will be a much better solution. One of my concerns that's a positive concern is I see the map only having certain areas where a merge can put people. What do you do with systems like Rator or Pajim or Morska? They're full all the time now. What if the server that you're merging into, say for example our server, what if they're full in the same three systems? Well, where are all those bases going to go? Are they going to just add hub spots on those planets for stations? I don't know, but I feel like whatever happens in that case, the solution has to be of benefit, because that means that we would have more range and capability within those systems, or there are additional systems that would then open up, perhaps providing more resources, perhaps providing more objectives to fight over. I would love to see all of these non-Armada images of space stations and things that we see in all the different space sectors. I know that stuff's all there. I feel like Stokely could do something. Maybe turn those into reward havens, so to speak. The space version of a dungeon to attack, if you will. So those couple of big questions, I want to see how those are answered before I say the end is nigh, and before I say wow, this is a panacea of absolute benefit. I don't foresee that being answerable until those two things are answered. Will it happen? I really think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but I really can't imagine it not happening because of the level disparity, unless they change that. And that's the inability for anyone level 26 or below to hit me, or for me to hit them. And that's not to say that they really should want to. I mean, it's a very drastic disparity in power. But if they're using miners that can now raid bases with impunity once that base has been cracked, hey, good on them. What a great way for them to get resources to grow.
Yeah, I agree. Right. I mean, it's kind of up in the air, and as JohnyChainsaw and I kind of discussed our personal thoughts on kind of what do server mergers hold in store for us, right? And it's still let's call it a confirmed rumor right now that it's going to happen. But let's talk about some of the recent events, right? So when you look at the current events going on, Um, and you talk about like the war effort, like the alliance milestones, right? As you know, I'm in a solo alliance, right? I'm kind of by myself,
Yeah.
and those, as a solo alliance or as a small alliance, those milestones are staggering. If you're in a big alliance, right, when you look at on server 22, you look at NGNS, you look at CAS, you look at Ghost, which you're part of, you can achieve the milestones much quicker because you have 70 players or 65 players or 72 players. What's the future look like? And why do you want to be part of a good active alliance? And what's active mean to you?
The biggest reason I individually have to be part of an active alliance is I enjoy the opportunity to interact with people without having anything like personal finances or individual personality clashes actually driving the conversation one way or the other. It's a very blank-faced kind of environment for a lot of people, and especially anyone who's introverted. I often don't sound introverted because I'm an extroverted introvert. I had to learn to be this way for what I did in the military, and it helped immensely. But this is part of my recharge time. Is I literally I go sit out on my front porch with my dog and just sit on the Wi-Fi and play Star Trek Fleet Command. So having that time to interact with people where they're not making demands of me and I'm not making demands of them, it is a release and it is a relief. So I like being in an active alliance in that regard. It seems to be a very positively charging environment for me personally. I do love the idea that you can have a small alliance or a solo alliance for those who want to do it. But I really feel like they are missing out on things, and not just in the function of rewards for event milestones and things. I think you're just the big part of the laughter, the jokes, the fun and good natured ribbing that we give each other is definitely different if you're not in a big alliance.
Yeah, and I would say it's also the kind of sharing of information, right? And luckily, I have enough positive relationships across more than one alliance that I can reach out and say, hey, what are you finding out about this? What's the best crew mix here? What's the best ship to use here? How do I progress through this mission?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of the game of gathering that information
Absolutely.
from others.
The
what are
best
your thoughts
example
on
I would
that?
give is for a long time, I didn't know that the reputation would lock at 10,500 rep before they made the changes. And I found that out through discussion with alliance mates and with other players. And while I had planned around it by pushing hard to get Fed and ROM up rep wise, that was an instantaneous, hey, I can breathe a sigh of relief about being, killing more Klingons than Klingons killed Klingons. Like it, because honestly, it was becoming one of those things where I'm never going to see these ships in my inventory. And it's disappointing to me that we don't have a confirmed locked stage now. But that as far as discussing key points and high points, I mean, we for a long time had a tips and advice page in Discord, and we would constantly talk about why does this crew member work better with this crew versus these targets. And yeah, that's all a great big part of this. And if you don't have the teammates on an alliance to do that, you are missing that piece of the puzzle or that piece of the pie.
Yeah, I agree. I even though I'm in a solo alliance right now, and you and I have talked about that, the thing I miss the most is the camaraderie, right? With all of the great men and women players out there that have deeper knowledge of the game than I do, right? And you've been ahead of me on every standing in the game, and we go up and down, right, between the two of us and a couple of others of who's at the top of which leaderboard. But being a solo player right now, I miss the camaraderie of bouncing ideas off of others. And I think that's an important factor in the game when it comes to why do you want to be in an alliance. And it probably carries further into some of the newer events that honestly just require you to be part of a bigger alliance to be able to compete at all.
I think that's true. I really do.
Your thoughts?
You have some possibilities otherwise, but that's really the linchpin. And it really doesn't make much difference if your alliance has 75 members or 65 members. But it does make a difference if your alliance has 30 members versus 75 or what have you. And mainly that's because of the power curve that exists within the alliance at that point. So no, I agree with you, man.
Yeah, and it's not just if you have a 70-member alliance, but only 30 are active. Well, it's all about activity level, right? And having active players. So for your alliance, how do you manage that, right? How do you know who's active and how do you guys truly manage?
But that is actually Cotton Eye Joe does that. And that's something he inherited from Lucid, who was who inherited Ghost from a player named War Wizard, who's gone. Lucid occasionally steps into Discord. We don't really hear from him much, but that's back from November of 2018 when the game started. And and mind you, I'm not talking about alpha and beta. That was about 8 months prior to November of 2018. The very start of 2018 is when the game really started in alpha. But that phase of things going on, it's you needed to figure out something, and what ended up happening is they were writing down what they could see as far as people's help given and attacking and defending and player ships killed and resources mined and all these things. And if they didn't see any changes, they'd reach out to them and see what's going on. And if somebody said, "Hey, I've been really busy with real life, I'll be back next week," that was one thing. But if we didn't hear anything from somebody for a while, it's safe bet to assume that either they lost access to their account or they quit.
But which happens, right? And people are going to come and go. So let's talk about kind of going back to this server merger thing, right? You and I have both been part of this sociological evolution that's happened on our server, and the way we've come to work together, and the way you and I directly play against each other. But suddenly we introduce 2,000 people or 1,000 more players that may be higher level than you and I, and I think you and I are probably in the top 3, right, in total power. What happens if we have 17 players bigger than us, or 1,000 players lower than us suddenly join our server? What's that change for you, gameplay wise?
The biggest change that will bring is dependent on what the factors I talked about earlier, but the biggest thing it's going to do is really impact PvP, because that's when you're going to see resource scarcity and actual space scarcity become an issue. I wouldn't be surprised to see people making threats in GC that if people don't get out of a system, they're going to be relentlessly attacked all the time.
So let's talk about your gameplay style, right? I mean, you've done everything, right? You're really good at rating. You're really good at PvP, no question about it, because you just kick my butt all the time. What's your preference when you look at the game and you log in every day? What do you really want to do, and why?
60-40. I would much prefer, PvP over in-game events, but I would have to break that 60% down a little bit to throw a 10 or 15% in for rating bases, because by far what I prefer is ship-to-ship combat. I've lived it, ate it, breathed it, all 9 yards for many, many years. I really just have always liked it, and as a result, I really, really enjoy trying to find the best tactics or logistics to enable wins or graceful losses, if you would, in ship-to-ship combat.
So we've had a couple of fantastic kind of neighborhood brawls, I call them, over the years, right, or over the last 18 months, and to me that's kind of my favorite part of the game, is raiding a base and having a defender show up and just having this all-out brawl in a kind of a localized, contained area where you're just battling ships. Is that fun for you, or what are your thoughts?
I'd like it to run the full gamut, mainly because there's so many options if the gameplay allows it. There's some tweaking that Scopely could do to enable more of all of the above. I appreciate the ship triangle, but at the same time, I really would love to see that be the ship pentagon, or something similar. The ship polyhedron, maybe. I don't know. That might be a bit much, but yeah, I think it could be a lot more expansive. And running from one end to the other means where you don't specialize, where you aren't, really, really proficient. That gives you a chance to learn where you may be the one teaching on the other end.
So let's talk about what's your major pain point in the game, right? What frustrates you the most,
the resource scarcity issue
when you play?
Artificial bottlenecks that Scopely puts in, and that's purely business model driven. I'd have to say although it's not totally rock paper scissors because of crew and research, the rock paper scissors aspect of ship-to-ship combat frustrates me.
So how does crew mix impact that for you, right? I mean, you obviously have been around long enough to mess with crews. You've had conversations with people to talk about crew mix. Is that throw the strongest player on the ship and go for it, or do you spend time learning and developing
it really
different crews along the way
and opportunities? There's a couple of crews that I've stuck with. Excuse me. I think everybody has. I mean, everybody knows Kirk and Spock are a phenomenal combo with any explorer. But the bottom line is, you really have to know that if you have a particular play style, certain crews just aren't going to support you, and certain crews are. So, sure.
Can I ask you one last question? All right, so somebody just joining the game, what's your best recommendation to them on how to play and what to get out of it, and how to deal with the society we're developing?
Don't take anything personal if it's not in a personal message or private message, because at that point you may need to. Might be worth taking personal at that point. And setting aside if you put money into the game or not, if you are careful about how you spend resources when certain events are going, you will get a lot more out of your resources than the person who does not consider the ramifications. If you have an event that's going to use XP or officer shards, well, don't spend all of your recruit packs or all of your XP until those events show up, especially if they show up in tandem. That way you benefit the most from spending those resources. That's really the two big ones: the personal attacks and the making your resources work more for you.
Yeah, that's great advice, Logres. And I gotta apologize to you for mispronouncing your name in my own head as Logres. And now I know the origin of it.
Sure.
But I really appreciate your time on the call today, and look forward to talking to you again. And thanks for being on. And this is episode 8 of Johnny Chainsaw and AZPotato.
Okay.
With
Thanks
our guest
My pleasure. Have a great one.
speaker, Logres.
Okay.